Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square, and I'm so pleased to welcome Emmy-winning journalist Jake Tapper. He is the lead Washington anchor for CNN. He hosts The Lead with Jake Tapper and co-hosts State of the Union. He is also a #1 New York bestselling author who has a new book, Race Against Terror, Chasing an Al-Qaeda Killer at the Dawn of the Forever War. Welcome, Jake.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, Jake, I wanted to start because you've covered 4 presidents and you've been critical about press access during Democratic and Republican administrations alike. So how would you characterize the Trump administration's handling of the media during his second term?
Well, it's two different. It's a tale of two cities, right? There's President Trump being completely accessible in terms of these press availabilities that he has all the time in the Oval Office and elsewhere. He loves interacting with the press. He loves being on air. He loves attention, and so that's quite a departure from President Biden and other previous presidents. But when it comes to just the basic duties of communications offices, answering questions and providing information, then it's the tale of the other city. It's pretty closed off. There's a lot of refusal to provide information. The Pentagon press rules are absolutely preposterous. Those were initiated last week, and they're absolutely preposterous. In terms of the lack of First Amendment protections they're asserting, and the potential criminalization of reporters just seeking information. So I guess I would say don't be distracted by President Trump and the shiny object taking questions in the Oval Office every day. There's a whole bunch of opaqueness as opposed to transparency beyond that is very very bad for the Republic. And let me just say, as you noted, this is what I think about. This is an issue for me. No matter who's in the White House,
right?
When Obama was in the White House, I would regularly note that his administration had used the Espionage Act to go after leaks more than every other president before him combined. And my basic point of view is, I get the national security argument, but generally speaking, these people work for us, and we have a right to demand transparency.
Would you say that there is a distinct difference between the second Trump administration and the first in terms of their the press access that they've been granting and some of their heavy-handed tactics, or is it more of a continuum?
Oh no, it's quite different. It's much more heavy-handed. The press office in the White House and elsewhere are much more openly adversarial and insulting. They are very likely to personally attack journalists on Twitter, in front of the camera, in very personal ways that I think are frankly immature, and not to mention unprofessional. Not to mention, if it's a good question, I don't see what mocking somebody does other than highlight the fact that you're not answering the question. There was a question offered by a Huffington Post reporter the other day, a private, the backstory is that President Trump and President Putin are supposedly going to meet in Hungary for some sort of summit in Budapest. And there's an irony in that because Budapest is I believe this is the reason, Budapest is the previous site where Russia and the United States had agreed for Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons to a guarantee of their sovereignty and security. And so the idea that Putin would be welcomed back in Budapest, Hungary, at the site of the previous peace treaty that was not honored by Russia, and somebody from the Huffington Post, which obviously is a progressive outlet, asked a question, whose idea was it? And the White House's response was, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, and Stephen Chung, the communications director, the White House response was, your mom. And then after the reporter reported that, Caroline Leavitt posted their private conversation in which she personally insulted him. And, look, I'm not crazy about every time the Huffington Post covers me, but like at the same time, I think that this is beneath the status of the White House to say your mom.
Right.
And it's that's a silly example, but it gets at the larger point, which is presidents and their administrations work for the American people.
Mm-hmm.
We have a tradition in this country of a free and open press, and then that was a perfectly logical question.
Right. It seems that the Trump administration and many politicians seem to view the press as a foil for political theater, and that seems to be more important than the more traditional dynamic, which was, you would ask a question. Sometimes they wouldn't give you the answer. I mean, quite frankly, often they wouldn't. But, there was some attempt to give you some sort of answer, however much spin there was. Now it seems very much geared towards, can I have a soundbite that then I can amplify on social media, as opposed to disseminating any kind of information.
I don't think we're only a foil. I think it's true that we're a foil quite often, but I think that quite often this Republican Party is more interested in attacking the news media than they are in attacking their actual opposition, the Democrats. I think this all the time. There'll be an interview that I do with a Democrat in which I'm being tough on the Democrat and forcing them to answer questions and whatever. And people in the Republican Party and the White House they want to attack me more than they want to highlight me asking Democrats tough questions. Not just me, I mean, just like the press in general. And it's the only thing I can think of is they are so vested in discrediting us so that when we report facts and truth about them that are not flattering, they can just dismiss it. Then that's more important than actually defeating Democrats. I find it all very odd. And look, I've been attacked by the Biden team and the Obama team, and
yes, we're not very popular during the Obama
administration. We're not supposed to be, but yeah, I mean, so like I feel like I just find it all very odd. But then again, I mean, it's also true that sometimes the Democrats seem more invested in, not all the Democrats, but like, for instance, Team Biden seem more invested in attacking members of the media than in attacking Republicans. And, we have this free country. People, they have the same freedom of speech that I do, but I don't find it particularly healthy.
Right. Well, you have obviously written extensively about former President Biden's health and his decline in the alleged cover-up by his inner circle. In your last book, Original Sin, you've now covered President Trump for a decade, and he's now 79. I'm wondering if Americans should have any concerns about President Trump's physical or mental health at this point.
Sure. He's 79. He's certainly not the same guy he was when I started covering him in 2015. He says things that are odd. Now, I don't know if the things he says that are odd are issues of acuity as much as they are of personality, but certainly I think that we should always be questioning the health of anybody in leadership, especially people who are up there in years and showing it. And yeah, I mean, look, I have a 2-hour news show on every weekday and a Sunday public affairs show that I co-anchor with Dana Bash, and we raise these questions and talk about them all the time. We talk about them with Democrats, with Republicans, with doctors. When he says like the other day, he said, or a few weeks ago, I guess, he said something about how he predicted bin Laden, or he said we keep an eye on bin Laden in a book he wrote a year before 9/11. It's not true. And we fact checked it. We can ask. I mean. But at the same time, I think that whatever Trump's issues are in terms of the bizarre things he says or the lies that he tells, I don't think that's being hidden from the American people. I think that that's out there. People see it. They don't like it or they don't care, or maybe some like it. I don't know. What I covered with Biden was what was going on behind the scenes that they were hiding. Now, that said, do I think that the White House is being completely transparent about whatever health issues this 79-year-old might have? No, I don't. And I think that it should be a law that the White House physicians have to be completely transparent about every test they're giving, every medication the president's on, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's not partisan. I just think that should be the law for anyone, because people are living longer and lasting longer in jobs, and we have a right to that information, in my view.
Right. And obviously a decade has passed, and, certainly he is not the same man that he was when he ran for president the first time. You can see that. The video clips live on forever. He's on his second physical of the year, his second annual physical, which is slightly unusual. It does seem that he has been a little more out of the public eye than during his first term. He won't be on camera every day, which we became used to. And so I do think that, these are valid questions to ask, especially for someone who does seem to enjoy the cameras as much as President Trump
Sure,
does.
absolutely. And we cover it on my show, and I know my colleagues at CNN cover it on my show. And when he had those bruises on his hands, and and his ankles were bloated. I mean, we had Sanjay Gupta, our chief medical correspondent, to talk about that, talk about what was going on. So yeah, I mean, I think all of these questions are valid. And look, I think they should be asked for more than just presidents. I think they should be asked for Supreme Court justices and members of the House and members of the Senate. There was a move. So last year, there was a woman who was the chair of the House Appropriations Committee named Kay Granger, Congresswoman from Texas.
Who disappeared.
She stepped down as chair of the Appropriations Committee and then basically vanished. And it turned out a local reporter in Texas tracked her down. She'd been checked into basically a dementia clinic or a dementia home. Tragic personal circumstance. And I feel for her and her family. But at the same time, she was a member of Congress, a sitting member of Congress. They had not disclosed that to their constituents. She was still drawing a salary, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a move on that committee, the House Appropriations Committee, by a congresswoman named Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez. She's a Democrat from Washington State. And it was just a motion during committee. Hey, there should be a mechanism by which if people think that members of Congress are having acuity issues, we can report this, and there can be some sort of internal investigation, maybe through the House Ethics Committee or whatever, some sort of process. And that was voted down. So, I mean, I think that there is a history and a culture in Washington, D.C. of hiding these things from constituents. And there is a history and culture of covering up these things. And I think that the press and the public and good faith members of the House and Senate and others need to realize, like, people aren't retiring at age 40 anymore. People are working until their 80s, and that's fine. God bless. But let's be honest and transparent about individual health issues for those public officials, for those elected officers.
Right. And there are legitimate concerns about the gerontocracy that we have. And certainly we have a whole class of new politicians who are challenging some of these older members of Congress, especially on the Democratic side this term. So, this
is chasing them out of office. And in some cases, in the case of Congressman Jerry Nadler of New York and Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, younger primary opponents appeared. And what I assume that was a factor, or maybe it was just timing, I don't know, but they announced they weren't going to run for re-election. I think either they're in their 70s or 80s or whatever. And look, again, God bless. My parents are in their 80s, and I hope to make it there one day. And, I'm not saying they shouldn't hold public office, but I am saying we should all let's be honest about these things. My delegate here, I live in DC, so I don't have an elected representative who can actually vote on the floor. But my delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton, she's 88. She's not allowed to drive anymore.
Right.
And there are questions about her wherewithal. She's a legend. She's an icon in Washington, D.C. in the civil rights community. But is it really in her best interest and Washington, D.C.'s best interest for her to keep chugging along as long as humanly possible, regardless of how well she can do her job? These are questions that need to be asked.
Yeah. Well, I want to move on to foreign policy, because that's, of course, the subject area of your new book, Race Against Terror. And it's basically the story of two assistant U.S. attorneys who are racing to lock up an al-Qaeda terrorist before he's set free.
Mm-hmm.
And so in his second term, Trump has gutted the Defense and State Departments, as well as the diplomatic corps. He shuttered USAID. Talk to us about the impact of all this on geopolitics. Do you feel like the world is safer or more dangerous now under Trump?
Well, there is obviously you're referring to soft power, the idea of the United States playing a positive role in countries throughout the world through USAID and through various aid that we give to countries. I think we're right now, President Trump and the president of Colombia in South America are going at it. And meanwhile, Trump is threatening to withhold aid. I think we give Colombia about $300 million a year in humanitarian aid. So the question is, does that make us less safe versus the hard power that President Trump exerts in terms of threats of military strikes, actual military strikes, and wielding tariffs as a weapon? I don't know which makes us safer and which makes us less safe. But I can tell you this. One of the things I learned while writing this book, Race Against Terror, which is about the investigation into and then prosecution of a deadly terrorist who had killed Americans and was determined to kill more. One of the things I learned, because most of the book is about the sleuthing by the assistant U.S. attorneys and by the FBI agents and other investigators, and how they caught this guy, how they proved the case against him. And one of the things I learned was it is incredibly important for us, for Americans, to have experienced counterterrorism officials in the Justice Department, in the FBI, who know what they're doing, who know how to get evidence that's admissible in a court of law, who know how to work with other countries to get evidence, and on and on and on. And one of the guys in my book, a guy named George Toscas, who did not cooperate with the book. So this is not repayment for his cooperation. I wish he had written me back or called me back. He did not. But I know enough about him from his colleagues to know that he was an incredibly important cog in the counterterrorism machine. He was the toughest guy on the national security desk in the National Security Division of the Justice Department. If you wanted to get an extradition request, or if you wanted to get an indictment approved, you had to get it through George before you could get it approved by the Attorney General or even the President of the United States. In this book, it's Obama. And Toscas was just vital. And I could go into how vital he was and how experienced he was. He'd been there since '93. But the larger point that your viewers and listeners need to understand is he's no longer doing this for us, because he signed off on that Mar-a-Lago warrant to search for classified documents when Trump was out of office. And for that reason, he was sidelined, taken out of his area of expertise. And if he hasn't had his last day at the Justice Department, he's about to. And that's a real waste and a real shame. And that makes us less safe. Trump is now, so the guy in my book, Spin Ghoul, is the very first, and as of now, only foreign terrorist tried in a U.S. criminal court for killing American service members in a battle zone, in a war zone. He's the only one ever, because it's not easy to prove a case against somebody for what they did in a war zone years before. President Trump is now attempting to prosecute the second such terrorist, a guy named Jafar, who was behind the Abbey Gate bombing. And Jafar sits now in a cell in Virginia. What's interesting, because in the book, as you know, the idea of bringing a foreign terrorist to the homeland was hugely controversial, and everybody was freaking out like he was going to bust out of prison and start killing people with superhuman-like powers. But Trump announced it, and nobody said a word. But in any case, the guy that was in charge of the Eastern District of Virginia was the acting U.S. attorney named Eric Siebert, an experienced prosecutor. He's now been replaced by a Trump loyalist named Lindsay Halligan, who does not have any prosecutorial experience, because Siebert wouldn't bring charges against Comey. And the guy in charge of, Lindsay Halligan, and the guy in charge of prosecuting the Jafar case was a guy named Michael Benary. And Michael Benary was removed from his position because some person on social media hypothesized that maybe he didn't like the Comey prosecution either. There was no evidence of it. This MAGA person wasn't even asserting it as a fact, but it didn't matter. Michael Ben-Ari was removed. Michael Ben-Ari wrote a public letter saying this hurts the case, and the current Justice Department leadership is more interested in pursuing the president's perceived political enemies than they are in protecting the American people. All of that makes us less safe, without question. When I go to get, let's say I have appendicitis, if I go to get an appendectomy, I don't care who the doctor voted for. I don't care what church they pray in. I don't care what sports teams they root for. I just want the best doctor to perform the appendectomy. And that is, in my view, how we should be looking at these national security prosecutors and investigators. And we are not looking at them that way. And that is dangerous.
Well, let's go back a little bit because so that we can break down how we've gotten here. Obviously, George W. Bush and Barack Obama had very different approaches to the war on terror and to the Justice Department, but that really does stand in contrast to how Trump has conducted himself in the second term. So can you talk with us a little bit about this evolution?
I think that we are in kind of a consensus place when it comes to the war on terror. Neither Bush, neither Obama, kind of like this middle ground. And by that, I mean, so Bush comes into office, 9/11 happens, assuming the best possible motives. He and his administration decide they need to do extraordinary things because of the terrorist threat. And they open Gitmo, and they do enhanced interrogation, which the rest of the world calls torture. They do extraordinary rendition, which the rest of the world calls kidnapping. Terrorists are tried as enemy combatants in military courts, and on and on and on. A lot of that is no longer operative. Not just because Obama ended it, because Trump did not return to it either. Gitmo is still not taking new terrorist detainees. There were some undocumented migrants that were put on the island, but that's a separate issue. And they weren't like, it was just a completely separate issue. It was on the island. But terrorists are still not being brought to Gitmo. The CIA is no longer doing enhanced interrogation. I don't know. I don't think we're doing extraordinary rendition anymore, the kidnapping from other countries. I would suspect that we are letting allies do things to people that we want to prosecute, but I don't know that for a fact. But I want to hear more about the Jafar case, because the Pakistanis, I think, got him first. And I'm interested to know what they did with him when they got him. But in any case, we are there. Bush used drones. Obama expanded the use of drone warfare by like 100-fold, not exaggerating. Trump uses them quite a bit as well. The main way that I see Trump changing things is he is now trying to use some of these powers granted to the president, or that the president claimed during Bush and Obama, taking some of these powers and now trying to apply them in other arenas. For instance, labeling Antifa a domestic terrorist group. It's not clear that he has the legal ability to do that, but he is trying to do that, using these powers to strike terrorists abroad, using those powers to now go after narco terrorists coming from Venezuela or whatever, because he has decided that narco terrorists are covered under terrorism and he can strike at them before they strike at us. And he is using this argument that because fentanyl and other narcotics, deprive tens of thousands of Americans every year of their livelihoods and of their lives, rather, that is basically narco terrorists waging a hot war against the American people, which is a novel legal approach. I'm not sure that if it were ever challenged, it would stand up in a court of law or before the U.S. Supreme Court. But as of now, I don't know anyone who has successfully challenged it. I'm sure that will happen. But in any case, so that is the main way he has changed things. He's trying to take these powers and expand them to domestic terrorists and to other foreigners that he's now calling terrorists. But in terms of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc., though the approach is pretty much the same as Biden and Trump first term and where Obama landed. I mean, there's still to this day, and I go into this in the book, has only been one Gitmo detainee tried in a U.S. criminal court. There still to this day has only been one foreign terrorist tried in a criminal court for killing American service members abroad. So it's not as though Trump took office and lots of things changed. Biden took office, lots of things changed. It's pretty much stayed consistent since Obama came in, tried to change things a lot, changed some, wasn't able to change others, compromised on keeping Gitmo detainees at Gitmo. And so I kind of see us in this murky consensus place.
So you recently wrote in The Atlantic how crucial it is to have federal government support for the war on terror. And here we are, it's been 24 years since 9/11, and the memory has faded for many Americans, although that may be hard for you and I to, comprehend as journalists who covered it. But many members of Gen Z, like my children, were born after the attacks. But you argue that Trump's tactics are leaving the U.S. and Americans abroad vulnerable to more deadly attacks. So I'm wondering, what do you feel the likelihood is that we could see some sort of another large-scale terror attack on U.S. soil in the next few years?
I have no idea. I worry about the ability of Lindsey Halligan and the Eastern District of Virginia she keeps firing prosecutors for not being loyalists. And this is happening, I should note, it's not just in the Eastern District of Virginia. There were some really incredibly impressive top FBI officials who were fired early on because they weren't allegiant enough to Trump. It's happening in other U.S. attorneys' offices across the country. And it concerns me because the expertise, I literally wrote an entire book about how difficult it is to prosecute terrorists, foreign terrorists in U.S. criminal court, not because I was arguing for it or against it, but just because I thought the story was so fascinating and the sleuthing and the investigating so interesting. But one thing I definitely took away from it is it's not easy, and you really have to have a tight ship, and you really have to have people who know what they're doing, because judges will throw out evidence that they don't think is admissible. And they see themselves as the last line of defense between the United States Constitution and just a lawlessness. And so, I mentioned earlier, there's only been one Gitmo detainee tried in a U.S. criminal court. It was a guy named Galani. He was a Gitmo. He was brought to Manhattan to be tried for killing Americans and others in the embassy bombings in 1998, the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. And the judge threw out the main witness because the Americans only learned of the identity of the main witness through Galani being tortured, through enhanced interrogation, whatever you want to call it. And because of that, the judge threw it out, and the jury acquitted Galani of 284 out of the 285 charges. So he was convicted on one charge. So he's not free. But that is one of the reasons why it's been so tough to get some sort of political consensus to bring people from Gitmo to the United States for trial, or any foreign terrorist to the U.S. for trial, because there is this fear of, well, a rogue judge and a reckless jury are going to free these people. That's why it's so important to have expertise. And this does seem to be a Justice Department, at least according to Michael Ben-Ari, more focused on other issues than protecting the American people. And I don't know Michael Ben-Ari, and I don't know his politics, and I've never talked to him, but I know he was at the Justice Department for more than 20 years, and he was put in charge of an incredibly important prosecution. And he says his being terminated hurts the case. And I have no reason not to believe him.
I read that the genesis of this book was at your son's paintball birthday party. So yeah. I want to hear about that.
So my son, Jack, has now been instrumental just by existing in two of my two major works two major efforts by me in nonfiction. One was The Outpost, which is a book I wrote about this devastating attack on an American outpost. Jack was born October 2nd, 2009. The outpost was attacked the next day, October 3rd, 2009. So I was in the hospital with my wife and, in the recovery room, holding Jack, watching TV, hearing this news report about this devastating attack, 8 service members killed, American service members killed, and holding my son and wondering, there was just something profound in the moment. Who were these 8 souls? And that set me on a journey to write The Outpost, which was about this outpost in Afghanistan. This book came out in 2012. Flash forward to Jack's 13th birthday party. It's 2022, and it's a paintball party. And I don't know how old your kids are, but or their genders, but I have a 16-year-old boy, and he's, I don't know, they like to fire things at each other.
Right.
Thankfully, they're not lethal. And so we're in the woods. We're in like the boonies of Virginia, an hour outside of town. And so because it's so far, I had pizza and refreshments for the adults so they could just come and chill out and hang out for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then drive back instead of spending 4 hours in a car. And one of the dads comes up to me and says, "Hey, I know so-and-so from The Outpost," one of the characters from The Outpost. And I said, "Yeah, that book was really tough to write because the military keeps such bad records and they don't like to share them." And he said, "Tell me about it." And then he proceeds to tell me this story about how he's an assistant U.S. attorney in Brooklyn, and he gets a call, and this Al-Qaeda terrorist has popped up and is in Italian custody. And he and his colleagues then have to prove a case against him with, there's not a file at the Pentagon for Spin-Ghoul. Here's Spin-Ghoul, here's who he killed, here's all their contact information, et cetera. They have to figure out everything. Once they figure out which battle it was that he actually was part of an Al-Qaeda ambush on American service members, they then have to track down everybody the same way that a journalist has to track them down. You find out the name of one of them, you hit them up on Facebook, you try to get another name, you try to get another number. There isn't a list that the Pentagon keeps of, here's everybody who served at Firebase Skin and their last known contact information and there's nothing like that. Or if it exists, they don't share it with anybody. So anyway, Bitcower then started telling me, Dave Bitcower is the dad. He starts telling me this story, and the sleuthing is the really interesting part of it. I mean, it is this unprecedented case and everything like that. But what was really interesting to me, just as somebody who watches CSI and Cold Case and Law and Order, is like the catching the bad guy, the fingerprint and the witness testimony and figuring it out, and the language barriers and the comical misunderstandings and the trip to Nigeria and the trip to Italy and all of this. And it was just this incredible story. And I said when he was done, I said what any reporter says, has anybody covered this before? Has anybody written about this? And he said people covered the trial a little bit, but nobody really understood all that had gone into the sleuthing, because you don't announce that in trial, and you don't announce it when there's a verdict. That's kind of like a postscript. But luckily for me, he told me the story. I found an editor at Simon & Schuster who was interested in it, and I was able to write the book, which was just it's always an honor to tell the stories of service members, and we go into the battle and the ambush and all that. But beyond that, just the story itself was so interesting, and I just loved learning more about it. And then I tried to write it. I've written a few novels also, and I tried to write it in as compelling a way as possible from the lessons I learned from writing fiction. So it's completely true. It's completely nonfiction, but I try to use some of the writing skills and writing tricks, for want of a better word, to make it as propulsive a narrative as possible.
Well, October 7th marked the anniversary of the U.S.-led war in Afghanistan, starting back in 2001. And of course, former President Biden received a lot of criticism for the U.S. withdrawal in Afghanistan. And frankly, his approval ratings never really recovered from that.
True.
So where do things stand in Afghanistan today? And what should the U.S.'s role be there at this point?
So, I would like to say, I think it's more for how we got out of Afghanistan than the fact that we got out of Afghanistan. There was the Abbey Gate disaster. There were all the Afghan allies that were left behind. It was just, it obviously could have been done better. I don't know where the American people are on leaving Afghanistan as a general note, which obviously President Trump initiated. and President Biden wanted to follow through on also. I would suspect that probably the American people are happy we don't have service members in Iraq and Afghanistan, if I had to guess. I haven't looked at polling in that, but I think it's how we did it. We obviously left the country to the Taliban. And the Taliban I was actually, I don't know that I've told this story before, but I was actually supposed to go to Afghanistan around that time. I was working on a documentary for CNN about the 20-year war. And we'd interviewed like 9 commanders. I mean, like it was a big effort. And I was going to go to Kabul. And then my wife, I hadn't told my wife. I was going to tell her right before I left, not like a minute before, but like the day before, because I didn't want her to worry. I mean, like I knew she was going to worry, but like why have her worry any more than she had to? So we were on vacation at our lake house, and somebody CC'd her on an email that they shouldn't have. And anyway, long story short, she put her foot down, and I did not go. But the reason she put her foot down is because she saw what I saw, what a lot of us saw, which was the Taliban was slowly, or not even slowly, the Taliban was conquering Afghanistan and making their way to Kabul. And it was pretty obvious. And all these safety and security experts were like, oh no, the Americans say that, Kabul is safe and fine and will remain in the hands of the Afghan government. But, the rest of us saw, and my wife certainly saw, like, no, the Taliban's going to take over. So that's where we are. And it's not good. And girls and women are oppressed, and, there's no education, and it's 20 years and unbelievable amount of money and blood that the American people and our allies spent over there. And for what? I don't know what we got for our money, and for all that effort by brave men and women. It's really rather tragic.
And certainly, I think the Russians felt like they were in the same position decades earlier.
When I wrote The Outpost, one of the themes of that book, and again, that all takes place in 2006 to 2009, and the book came out in 2012. So this is with some distance, but outside Combat Outpost Keating, which is the outpost. So the book is about this outpost, true story, that was located at the bottom of 3 steep mountains, about 14 miles from the border of Pakistan. And it's about all the men and women who served there, what they did there, their successes, their failures, and then the end of the camp when there's this overwhelming attack, October 3rd, 2009. And the idea of this is a place, this is a country where other nations go to die, where empires go to die, is one that they were thinking in 2006 when they rolled into town. And there were several Soviet vehicles outside the camp that had just been there since the 1980s because the Mujahideen had defeated the Soviets. And, there were a lot of the soldiers were very aware that this is where Alexander the Great had fallen. And and this particular part of Afghanistan is called Nuristan. It's the Afghanistan of Afghanistan. It is like the least hospitable. It's its own tribe. And it's where The Man Who Would Be King takes place, the Rudyard Kipling short story and the great movie with Michael Caine and Sean Connery. It's just a famously or infamously inhospitable place. And the idea of this is where empires go to die is something that I think about a lot since right outside the camp were these monuments to the Soviets falling. But we thought that we'd break the streak, and we did not.
No. Well, Jake, you've been so generous with your time. I can't thank you enough. Before we go, I just wanted to ask you, because you have written so extensively about the military and veterans. I know that is a cause that's very dear to your heart. Talk to us about how you decided that this was going to be something that you did want to write so much about.
Well, I mean, the germ probably was planted when my mom, who's a nurse, took a job at the VA in Philadelphia. And then obviously, and then when I covered John McCain running for president in 1999 and 2000, it was very moving. You'd roll into town to a town hall and you'd see like a Vietnam veteran by the road holding a sign. This is 25 years ago, saying, like where he served. And, because we as a country treated our Vietnam veterans pretty poorly when they got back. So, I mean, intellectually, I knew it was an issue that mattered, but I think I was a White House correspondent for ABC News when the outpost, combat outpost Keating was attacked. And I had covered the war in Afghanistan. I'd covered the debates over surging troops or not, or this and that, from the comfort of the North Lawn. 10,000 troops, 20,000 troops, 30,000 troops, just numbers, really. And there was something very moving and profound in that moment when I was holding Jack as a baby and hearing about the outpost overrun, and that I wouldn't even believe myself if I hadn't then set on to write this like 500-page book about the outpost. Like, it set me on a path to tell their stories. And I remember one time I went out for once word got out that I was writing a book about the battle in 2009, other deployments of troops from previous years reached out to me also saying, you need to cover us in 2006. You need to cover us in 2007. So I went out to lunch with these guys, Dave Roller and Alex Newsom, who had served there in 2007 to 2008. Dave Roller actually is also the guy that Bitcower knew when he said, hey, I know somebody that
right
in that book. Anyway, Dave Roller and Alex Newsom. Dave Roller came from Coral Gables, Florida, plenty of money, life prospects. Alex Newsom, gorgeous guy from Beverly Hills. Like, these were not guys who needed to enlist. These were post 9/11 veterans, young, smart, handsome, world's their oyster guys who enlisted. And they took me out to lunch because they wanted to make sure that my book included the names of some of the guys they served with who had been killed in action. And I came back and I said to my wife, I said, I'm such a piece of crap. I've never sacrificed anything. I've never served some cause greater than myself. I've never, gone through boot camp or enlisted. It never even occurred to me in 1991 when I graduated college to enlist. And obviously it was a different time and everything, but still. And she said, yes, but you can tell their stories. You can tell their stories. So I think that experience is why I do what I do. It's I always say it's literally the least I can do.
And it is such a profound honor to talk with the troops. I have had the pleasure of interviewing people and their families who did 6 deployments overseas between Iraq and Afghanistan, and just the incredible strain that caused in their lives. And those stories, are not that long ago, but I think it's easy to forget them. And so it's a much smaller sacrifice. It's not really a sacrifice for what we do, but at least we can be part of the process in telling those stories, because it is so important. We have just, an entire generation of troops that sacrifice so much for our war on terror. And, a lot of times now, as we have been moving towards an idea of not being the world's policeman, those stories can't be forgotten. So it's wonderful that you are still dedicated to bringing those stories to life.
Yeah, as much as I can, as often as I can. It's truly an honor to do it.
Well, Jake, thank you. His new book is Race Against Terror. It is a gripping read, like so many of his other books. And of course, you can always see him on CNN during the week and on the weekend. Jake, thank you so much for taking so much time for us here at
Thank you. It was a real honor. Thank you so much.